Okay, welcome anybody who might be watching either in playback or live. Going to kick off with a song to start the first ever PMTVQ's session. So here we go. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. There is a reason for that track. A friend of mine, I think he's OrgPM on Twitter. He seems to have appreciated my Rockstar PM hashtag, and so I thought I'd actually get some music on air. And I've chosen Coldplay Paradise because, just like my guest Bernardo today, I think, and just like hopefully anybody watching, every time you close your eyes, you go to paradise thinking of project management.
Not of me, that's for sure.
Oh dear, right. So into the program then. We've basically got 45 minutes today. We're going to cover a few different things with my special guest Bernardo Tirado. In case you haven't come across Bernardo before, Bernardo is a Six Sigma black belt. He's a certified PMP. He's an industrial psychologist. He's the founder and CEO of the Project Box, and that's the site where you can find all the latest information on project management leadership. So I think in a nutshell, Bernardo is he's a highly qualified, experienced guy. He's also very friendly, and he makes a lot of appearances on Twitter. In my eyes, he's one of the sort of, I would put him up there as in the Twitter PM elite. He's one of those people who's always putting stuff out there, sharing stuff, giving back to the community. And you may well have seen his TV shows that he's been doing called Meet the Experts, where he's really picked out other people from the community and done some great interviews. So I wanted Bernardo on the show as the first guest because he's such a great guy, basically. And just to explain what the show's all about, it's basically about finding out more about the person, Bernardo, because you've seen a lot of him on Twitter, but let's find out about the real person. That's just a sort of quick intro bit. And then the real focus of the show is over to Bernardo to find out what Bernardo thinks about project management, why he's interested in it, and whether we can extract any really useful bits of advice for project managers out there. So that's pretty much enough from me. Let's go over to Bernardo, and I'll start, Bernardo, by asking you just if you could introduce yourself and explain what you do.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me as your first guest. Clearly, I'm an underachiever from the whole list of things that you've kind of listed out as far as what I do. I'm kidding, of course. I think as far as what I do, a lot of what I've been focusing on over the last, I'd say, 15 years or so, which kind of makes me a bit more older than I look, has to do with marrying industrial psychology and project management. And a lot of what I found very passionate about at an early age was really understanding the human dynamics. And it was really around how to go about really being able to deliver results through people, especially when I was managing projects. What do I do now? Well, I've been writing a few different books. I'm actually in the middle of writing one right now. I also do a lot of different speaking engagements, also do consulting and training, in addition to having a full-time job, so I have two different types of jobs. So I've been keeping myself very, very busy, and a lot of what inspired me to create the Project Box has to do with the fact that I used to be an adjunct professor. I used to teach industrial psychology before I moved out to the UK. And then when I came back, the teaching arena wasn't really picking up. So I wanted to be able to really focus on and share the learnings that I learned throughout my career and really help others to kind of figure out what works best for them. And that kind of has been the impetus of of creating the project box is to provide free resources and free materials to help others, as well as cross-share from other guest writers around what has worked for them. Ultimately, again, to kind of build that community.
Fantastic. Okay, so before we get into the really serious project management and the tough issues,
Okay.
I just wanted to ask you what you do for fun.
What do I do for fun? Well, a whole bunch of different things. Recently, I started to rock climb. So I'm not the most athletic person, but it is something that I started to do and quite enjoy. When I get a chance, I do hip-hop dance. I was doing it for quite some time. I started probably around 8 years ago, and even went to Pineapple Studios out in London to do some classes there. Enjoy biking. So I do things that keep me active. But I also take classes, which may not sound fun, but I do take classes like improv comedy and things of that nature, which gets me out of my comfort zone. And it pushes me in different areas and different ways, in essence, to kind of round myself out. So there's a whole bunch of different things, but I would say those are just to name a few.
Fantastic. Wow. I don't know how you found time for all this stuff, but it sounds amazing. Okay, so let's go into the project management side of it then.
Sure.
So first of all, I'm interested in why you got into project management, why and how.
I started my career working and doing merger and acquisition work. I was doing post-integration, looking at small to mid-sized accounting firms that were being acquired by my company. And my job was to look at the processes, the people, and the infrastructure to do the integration work. And at a young age, I started to look at the people that were being acquired and a lot of the resistance that was happening because they were being acquired by a very large multinational firm. And I started to realize that in order for the integration to be successful, I saw my mentors at that time really work around how do I create the what's in it for me factor for those individuals to really be a part of this now newer culture. So that this, in essence, at the time, I didn't know this, but it was around cultural integration. And they were focusing more on the softer skills, whereas I was focusing on doing actual data migration from, for instance, from Tesseract to PeopleSoft to a human resource information systems. The first one that I mentioned was a little bit more ancient at that time, and bringing it up to PeopleSoft. So what got me started was working on multiple projects that really touched people. And then from there, looking at how to hunt for opportunities when I was going for my Six Sigma Black Belt, which was quite different from how I originally started out, which was where I was assigned the projects. Now I was actually responsible for looking for opportunities of efficiency.
Okay. So your first real encounter with project management, what sort of organization was that with?
Are you asking what company I was working for?
Okay. Now then, in terms of what you've learned, obviously you've been in project management for quite a long time.
Yeah.
What would you say was, you mentioned industrial psychology.
Yep.
What does that mean in sort of layman's terms, and why is it relevant to project management?
Industrial psychology is one of the branches that primarily focuses on studying humans in the workplace. Many of the folks, and it's evolved from pretty much war times, where they were looking at how do we create an efficient, highly efficient military SWAT team, or how do we make sure that we have the right assessments to hire or bring on the right skill sets from a military standpoint, like Myers-Briggs. Myers-Briggs, which is a mother-daughter team, leveraged Carl Jung's research to create their model, the Myers-Briggs assessment. But that was created because they were trying to assess if women were apt to work in wartime. That's where that came from. Now, many people know that or know the history behind it, but that's where that specific piece came from. And so industrial psychologists create assessments. They look at group dynamics, power and leadership. It's focusing on the unconscious in the workplace. Most of the people that go into industrial psychology go into human resources or go into a large consulting or a small consulting firm that focuses on human performance. I chose not to do that. My undergraduate work has always been around finance. So I've always been in business. And when I was looking for something to complement my advanced degree, in addition to my bachelor's degree, I wanted something that would complement the analytical side of education that I had. So I was on the hunt for a psychology that touched business, so business psychology. And when I looked across all of the psychology, a lot of it had to do from a clinical standpoint or any kind of therapies. But there was this one specifically called industrial psychology, or some people call it social organizational psychology or industrial psychology. But in essence, it's studying people in the workplace.
Okay. That when I first looked at your website and I saw that last sentence that you just gave, a study of people in the workplace, my ears really sort of pricked up, if you like, because I've only had half the time that you have in project management, so I'm nowhere near as experienced. But in my time, I think I've gone on a journey from thinking that project management was all about Gantt charts and being authoritarian and making sure that people deliver to the deadline, and if they don't, thinking how am I going to punish them, for example. And that's the sort of mindset I started out on. But over the years, well, fairly quickly, to be honest with you, it became apparent that wasn't working, and I've developed a totally different take on project management. And I think for me, the phrase that sums it up is, I think it's lead through influence, not through authority, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure some management author can take credit for that, but for me it's true, and that's why I was fascinated when I saw that your interest is in how people work together. So going from, I want to try and move from the sort of theoretical side right down to the practical on how we make a difference in how we work with people on a day-to-day basis. And I wondered if perhaps we could do that by exploring a case study. Now, just before I do this, I just want to point out to anybody who might be watching now or afterwards, this is all completely unscripted, and Bernardo hasn't had any sort of pre-warning about what we're going to talk about. So please bear with us if we don't come across as entirely competent. Well, me, obviously not Bernardo. But let's give this a go. And also, while I'm waffling on, I do want to remind anybody that if you are on Twitter, #PMTVQS, the PMTVQs hashtag, we'd love to take some questions from anybody who's watching. So we're looking at the stream, and send us a question and we'll see if we can answer it. So anyway, let's do this case study. So it's all theoretical. There's an organization, there's a team of people who are working to put in a new corporate IT system, and there's a problem. The problem is that the senior managers on the project team who are working in the business side, they just aren't coming forward and owning the project. They don't seem to be engaging with what is required. They don't seem to be putting resources in to deliver the required deliverables. So work isn't getting done. Bernardo,
Yes.
where would you start with that sort of scenario? You're the project manager. The team and the senior management don't seem to be engaged with the project. So there's a people problem. What would you do?
Well, the first thing I would do is try to find out how is this project tied to their KPIs? And are their KPIs tied to compensation? So first I need to understand, what's in it for me factor for them. 9 times out of 10, when there's a disconnect between compensation and the organizational goals, projects tend to not go the way you want them to go because they don't see any kind of ramification. They don't see a consequence as a result of not getting specific things done. Now, most people may say, well, does it always have to touch compensation? The answer is no. The other thing that someone can actually also look at, what I would also look at, is around the sponsorship that exists around that particular initiative. So one of the gaps, so one of the opportunities, depending on how you see it, that project managers don't really leverage is having the sponsor actually be a part of the kickoff meeting and introduce the project manager to the project team. Because by doing that, what happens is that the sponsor goes in and says, here we have John. John has been selected to lead this particular project because John is smart in X, Y, and Z, or is experienced in X, Y, and Z. We have full faith confidence as senior management that John is going to be able to execute with your support and your effort as a team. So please make sure if there's anything that he needs, that you provide him the support that he needs, that you can provide him the support to make this particular project happen. What does that do? It sets up John for success because the people on that project team are going to be like, wow, okay, Big Boss is looking at John and believes that John can deliver. So the team is then going to start to provide that person with the level of respect and also a level of authority. Now, if John messes up, that's on nobody else. That's on John. And unfortunately, what happens is that sometimes people, in this example like John, may get that platform if that happens, but they provide unconscious enabling behaviors that cause the group to think, you know what, John is not really a good leader. He's awful in building relationships. He's good at building Gantt charts, building the project plans, getting things documented, but he's not good at leading. So you know what, I'm going to look to somebody else. So you have three situations in the case study that you've given me. The first is the fact that maybe the senior manager has no vested interest in the project. There's no consequence to having the project fail. The second is the fact that you may have a missed opportunity for senior management to provide the right level of sponsorship for that manager to do their job. And the third has to do with the project manager themselves. Many times, and quite frankly, we all want to think we're wonderful. We all want to think that we are the next thing as sliced bread. But the reality is we have faults. And we have to really have a sense of self. Otherwise, we will be perfect and everyone will be millionaires, but we're not. So we need to think about the fact that we have to take a step back, hold up that mirror, and it's going to be ugly. There are going to be things that we may not like about ourselves, but that's why you have to work on them, you know? And you're not going to be everything for everyone. But if you hold up that mirror, then you can start thinking introspectively to say, what am I doing to cause this team not to trust me?
Fascinating. Okay. I'm going to continue with the case study just a little bit more, if you don't mind. This scenario then. So you've got the project team and the senior management. So that basically what I'm thinking of is the sponsor and, if you like, the senior supplier in Prince 2 terms. So that'll be the person who is the line management of all the people who need to deliver the project.
Yeah.
That those people just, for whatever reason, aren't committing to the project. So as the project manager, you're sort of having a progress review, a weekly progress review, and you're getting all sorts of bad signs. You're getting people declining the invitation to turn up to the progress review. The people who do come are saying, I was too busy on other projects X, Y, Z to deliver anything, so I haven't delivered. So as the project manager, I suppose you're sat there thinking, is there some kind of commitment problem? Well, yeah. And I was interested in what you said about is their performance on the project linked to KPIs? And is that linked to some kind of reward, whether that be coming up at their annual appraisal for promotion. Will it be reviewed? Will their performance on a project be reviewed? Or perhaps there's some kind of financial benefit on successful completion of the project. There's a little bonus or something. So just to make this scenario a little bit more difficult for you, I'm going to tell you that the organization is a public sector organization.
Yep.
There are no financial rewards for performance. So in terms of performance management, you have an annual appraisal in my hypothetical situation, and
I don't know if it's hypothetical. I think you're getting free advice, but that's okay.
So there's no financial means of rewarding people. So how would you look to build commitment without being able to offer a financial reward?
So I'm going to take apart what you kind of questioned, because you've thrown in sponsorship and you're throwing in project manager. So I want to make sure that I kind of answer your question in the order that you kind of presented it. From a sponsorship standpoint, if a sponsor is not really listening or not attending any of your meetings, clearly the project is low in their priority. It's not on their radar screen. It's not important to them in any way, shape, or form. Or there may be some political situation going internally where that person wants to undermine that project because they don't like the other senior head that is sponsoring it. There's always all these different dynamics that one may not always be aware of. As a project manager, my job would be first to show what the relevance and the importance of this project is going to be. So if you're going to be implementing a new software, a new technology, what is the return on that investment? What is the efficiency? If you can quantify the actual savings in an organization by implementing this particular tool, or by being able to say, well, it's going to be more efficient, or give them a prototype. So if you think about like Agile, where you're kind of giving a prototype, if you can give them something that they can touch and feel quickly, then they may be more committed. So it's your job to figure out how to pitch that project, even though they're the ones that gave it to you. So your job is to pitch that project to them and show what the value is to have that project go from this level of priority up to here. So that's the stakeholder piece. When you're talking about, I would say, KPIs not touched, the compensation, and so forth, then the next component is, what's the motivating factor? What's going to motivate people to really rally around a particular project? And it's going to really depend on the individual and how well, again, this is all about selling, whether you're selling to your sponsor or you're selling to the actual project team. Many times, even if it's public or private, project managers are given volunteers or SMEs from different parts of the organization who A, don't want to be there, and B, have a whole bunch of other priorities on their list. And it just happens to be that you're the one that's been assigned on that project to make it happen. It's up to you to kind of create this family dynamic, to be this figurehead in that group, to really motivate and inspire those individuals to want to work for you. If you think about, and it's not all about compensation, if you think about people going, and many surveys have been done around this, around people, even though they want compensation, they want more money, they rather have less money and be in an environment that they're going to be happy in than have more money and be in a situation they're miserable in. Same kind of a theory and also practicality falls into when you're leading projects. It doesn't always have to tie into the KPIs. I suggest that it should, if you're looking for it to be as a part of a systemic change. But if it's not, then the question is, how do you create an environment that they want to work for you?
Okay, that's really interesting. And I suppose moving on from that, how to create the environment that where people want to work for you and want to deliver for you. Obviously, even though they're in a matrix management environment, they're obviously not your direct report.
Correct.
That's a real challenge for, I think, probably anybody in project management. Moving on then from the case study, just to...
Actually, I don't know if it's... I disagree. It's not a challenge. I think what happens is that it just adds more time to your planning. What happens is that many of us are given a project, here you go, here's your team, go execute. but we don't take the time to get to know who those team members are. Yes, there may be people that are virtual, so you can't really go out for a cup of coffee to get to know them, but it doesn't prohibit you from actually building one-to-one relationships with those individuals. Like if you ask a project manager, what are 5 things that you know about each of these project team members that are not work-related? I bet you they can probably maybe name 1 at most. So it only takes 10 minutes or 20 minutes to get to know someone. If you have a team of 10 people, that's what, 200 minutes out of your day or out of your life to be able to get to know someone and start planting that seed. So I disagree. It is a challenge, yes, but that's only because we don't take the time to get to know the people we're working with.
Okay. I mean, that sounds like a really great practical tip that we can share with other project managers. Taking the time to get to know your team, presumably right at the initiation of the project.
Correct.
So I was going to ask you a sort of lead-on question then. I've seen this storming, norming, forming, something else business model, and I was wondering what your advice would be on getting us through those steps.
So it's actually Dr. Bruce Tuckman's theories of group development, and it is in essence how groups form or how groups mature throughout different stages, and there's 5 of them. There's a forming, norming, storming, performing, and lastly adjourning. In the forming stages, in essence, I call it the honeymoon phase, where everyone is, think of it like first day of school. You want everyone to like you, you want to be a part of the group, and that kind of feeling doesn't go away when you join a project team. You want to do your best, you want to be liked by the people that are around you, especially if they've never worked with each other. And then you go into the whole storming component, which is now where you start to test each other to figure out whether or not, how do we create our self-governing norms within an organization. And then you get to the whole norming component where you get to a state of where people are working together and you're performing and then adjourning. So it's kind of think of it as the bell curve. The biggest pitfall, and I know you asked me, how do you go through these pieces? I'd rather focus on the first 2, which are more relevant to project managers, and the biggest area where you can get a situation where people undermine you is in the forming and the storming stage. The reason those 2 specific stages are extremely important is because groups look for leaders. Whenever, like if you have a traumatic situation, in any situation, when you think about the science and the studies of groups always look for one leader. Now that leader can be given or assigned by the organization, or the group all of a sudden unconsciously chooses someone to lead them. And if you think about that concept, when you're leading a new team that you've never led before, they're going through that same unconscious thought process. You, John, are now the project manager. It's up to you to prove to us that you can lead us. If we believe that you can't lead us, then we're going to find somebody else to lead us, and that's a very big issue. And so when you think about the stages of group development, in the forming stage, everyone is happy-go-lucky, and that's really why I stopped you before, because in that stage is where you want to get to know everybody. That's where you want to have one-on-one time with them, even if it's a 20 minutes a week for the first few weeks just to check in and chat with all of them. And most people are like, well, that's too much. They're not my direct reports. It will pay off threefold because you're building these relationships. And secondly, when it's time for you to lead another project and they're assigned to your project, they're going to work extra hard for you. So by building those relationships, there's 2 things that you have to make sure that you're prepared to do. One is find out why they're there and what do they want to get out of the situation. And figure out how do you embed that along the way in that process. Secondly, you want to talk about your expertise. I know most of us don't want to brag, but you want to talk about your expertise. You want to start off with why are you leading them, And most of us don't talk about that, but you have to, because you want them to have this instant, you want to build credibility with each of the different people. In that stage, you're also figuring out who is going to be, in essence, a troublemaker. who's not interested in this project, who doesn't want to be there, and so forth. So your job, in essence, is trying to think about how do I make it easier on them. And I've had those situations where there are people who are like, I don't want to be on this project. And I'm very frank with them, like, look, I know you don't want to be on this project. Tell me what's the minimum that you're willing to do to help me to make this project work and make you look good. And I just make sure that I don't pile on a lot of stuff for them to do. Now, is that fair compared to the other team members who are probably picking up their slack? Absolutely not. But at the same time, I need to get everyone motivated. And I do that for the first few weeks, and then slowly I start to add on more stuff because you want them to start working for you. You want them, the person that doesn't want to do anything, you want them to get them. It's like riding a bicycle. They're riding the bicycle with the training wheels, and then eventually slowly take it off, and you don't let them know you took off those training wheels. Do you see what I mean? So you have to invest that time in helping coach them and see that, look, you may not get anything out of this project, but I'm going to teach you something that you may not learn in your current situation. So in those stages, in the forming stage and the storming stage, it's very important to set first of all, get to know your team. In the storming stage, you have to be able to know when to set the boundaries. You're the one that sets up the stage on how the team will develop. Many times we kick off a meeting, let's say at 10 o'clock in the morning, and then you let people stroll in around 10:10, 10:15, and then you get started. Don't do that. By doing that the first time, they know it's okay to continue to show up 10, 15 minutes past the hour. But if you say it's going to start at 10, whether there's one person or two people, you start that meeting. You start that meeting and just say, listen, I'm sorry, I started at 10 o'clock. Your time is valuable to me. And I want to make sure that I'm maximizing our time together so that I can let you out 15 minutes earlier. So either we start on time or we stay here later than we need to. Do you see what I mean? Like, you have to set that stage. And most project managers don't feel comfortable by putting their foot down and saying, no, I'm going to start at this time. Now, some project managers may be a little bit more relaxed, and they're fine with 10:10, 10:15, and that's okay. It's what works best for you. But don't turn around and let the 10:10, 10:15, and then all of a sudden, no, I want to start at 10 o'clock. You can't change that. You set the tone already from the start. Make sense?
It does. It's really fascinating. I'm looking at the clock, Bernardo. It's
wow.
It's 12:35 here, and not quite much earlier there. Thank you very much for getting up for us. We've probably got about 10 minutes left.
Yes.
I'm just going to refresh my little Twitter stream. I see that the people out there in the world are being shy, and they haven't tweeted us any questions.
That's fine.
Which, maybe next time. There's still a bit of time if anyone wants to quickly get one in. But in the last 10 minutes, I've got a couple more questions which really follow on from what you were just saying.
Yeah.
Because I think it's such a fascinating area. I'm going to open myself up here and confess that some feedback that I've had on my project management style is that I'm too nice and I'm too soft with people. This is something that has been said fairly recently, and I take it on the chin because I've always had this philosophy that you succeed by keeping people on side, keeping people pulling in the right direction, and therefore I don't tend to be terribly confrontational unless I feel it's absolutely necessary, and obviously where people step across a line. So to be specific on how I'm being too nice, one of my sort of values and one of my a practice that I have is I strongly believe that you never escalate an issue to a colleague's manager unless you've fully discussed the issue with the colleague first, and stressed why you need something to change, and you've given them the opportunity to make that change. And so I wouldn't go then direct to their manager until I'd done that one-on-one and seen the outcome, and if after a certain sensible amount of time the positive change hasn't worked out, then I might think about escalating, particularly if it's obviously damaging the project delivery. I wondered if you had any reflections on that approach and whether you feel that I'm being too nice and I ought to be firmer and get stuck in there and start talking to people's managers more.
So I think, and try not to take this the wrong way. Being nice, there's nothing wrong with being nice. There's nothing wrong with being nice. There's nothing wrong with putting people first. What is wrong is giving the perception of being weak or not being confident. That is where I don't think that's what they're not referring to nice. I think they're referring to your level of confidence, your level of being authoritative. And you can still be nice. The question is, how do you come across as being that expert, providing that level of authority and level of power? And that's where that niceness, I've heard it many times with different people, when people are trying to shy away to say, you know what, you don't come across as that authoritative figure. So there's a few things that maybe we can talk about, maybe they don't have enough time, on what you can do to kind of help raise that confidence. Not saying that you're not confident, but give that additional impression, because that's what's happening, is that there's this impression that other people feel that you're not confident in leading that team. With respects to working with the project, your teammate and coaching them, and then they're not listening, and then worrying about escalating. I'm like you. I grew up in a culture where you give the feedback directly to the person once. If they continue happening or it continues to happen again, you say it twice, and sometimes I don't, but I say it twice. If it continues to happen, I go immediately to the leader. Now, the first time and the second time, I document it. I send an email recapping the conversation. What's the behavior? What's the example of the behavior? And what you like to see addressed. The reason why I document it is because there's always the he said, she said, or he said, or she said scenario. But if you have a documentation, then you have something to fall back on. Now, I've also worked in environments where culturally, and it's not culturally meaning like UK, US, I mean the organizational culture, is that rather than talk to you, they just go to your boss. Now, that, I'm not going to lie to you, that shit pisses me off. To be very blunt with you, that it really pisses me off. Because it's like there's this lack of professionalism and courtesy to say, hey, I have an issue with you, or I didn't quite like that. Give the person the chance to figure out what is it that they didn't do right for them and address it. So I'm not a firm believer of just going directly to the boss. And if people do that, then that shows to me that there's a level of insecurity on how to manage relationships. To build relationships and manage relationships, you have to be able to be honest and also give concrete examples to the other person as to what you're talking about. There have been many times where people say, well, I don't like that you've done that. I'm like, okay, well, give me an example of when did that happen? And they can't, because they've made it up in their head. So I said, well, when you can give me an example of what I did, something to annoy you or something that you don't think went well, then at least I can make a connection. I said, that's like me coming to you and saying, hey, Bob, I don't like that fact that you did X, Y, and Z. And then just leave it like that. Just throw the ball and let you hanging. That's not helping you. That's not helping you. That's actually criticizing you. That's not feedback. That's a criticism. I said, so if you're going to criticize me, keep it to yourself. Give me something I can work with. Does that help a little bit?
That's really good advice. I like the idea of bringing a bit of rigor into the process, where you're backing up the conversation with documentation. I suppose that sort of underlines the fact that this is an issue which needs some work.
Right.
Isn't just a friendly conversation. Okay, that's fantastic. I reckon we've got about 3 minutes left. I'll just refresh the Twitter feed. No, nobody's on #PMTVQs this time. But I think it's probably about time we looked at wrapping up. I know you've got to get off to work soon, and I've got to finish my lunch.
There
So
you go.
let's do our wrap up. I'd like to start by wrapping up on my side, and then I'd like to hand over to you, Bernardo, for the last say. Um, so, I mean, I just want to really thank you ever so much for coming on and giving this a go. You took a big risk because it's all live and it's all untested and nobody's done this before, well, with me. So I really thank you for that, Bernardo. I think the advice you've given has been hugely beneficial to me personally, and I hope that it was of interest to other people as well. Um, a quick plug for this show, PMTVQs. If anybody out there would like to appear in a future show, I'd love to hear from you. I'm at Public Sector PM on Twitter, so please do connect. And in the future, I'm hoping to do a group discussion because I think this Google Hangouts thing allows us to do group discussion. So please get in touch. And I'd like to hand over to Bernardo now. Bernardo, if you could just tell everybody how they can connect with you. And I know that you've got a book out, so if you could mention that and just anything else that you'd like to tell our listeners.
No, thank you. First of all, thank you again for having me on your show, and I wish you much success with it. I know that it's always a learning process as well as, getting the viewership. So anything that I can do to help support you on the show, just please feel free to reach out and let me know. For those of you that are listening in, or I'm going to say more watching than anything else, if there are any questions that you have that I wasn't able to address or that you want to ask me, just feel free to tweet me at the PMO box. Again, that's at the PMO box. And to kind of help support, this endeavor as well, I do have a book out. For those of you that are interested and are watching, you're more than welcome to have a discount that I'm offering only for those that are watching this particular show. So the discount, just go to the web address, the www.theprojectbox.us/discount leadership. Again, that's www.theprojectbox.us/discount leadership. And if you want to check out my site, just go to theprojectbox.us and take a look at the rest of the materials that we have out there. So that's pretty much it.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Bernardo, and I shall sign off now.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Take care.